fertilize in the fall, it's important where you put those nutrients. We wanted to talk about that today.
Well, it's also important how you put those nutrients out. Like, for example, this particular field. We put some manure out in the fall or late summer, and we're planning on that feeding our crop next spring.
Well, to some degree. We're not counting on a lot of this manure to be there. It's spread out at a low rate. We know there's not a lot of actual nutrients in the type of manure that we have. But anyway, it's still something that we've got to consider, whether it's manure, commercial fertilizer, what are you going to do? I personally don't like having manure placed on top of the ground. If I'm going to do it, I would like to immediately incorporate that. That's, in my opinion, the right placement for manure.
Because that way you're putting the fertility down underneath a protective layer of soil. And this is a really big deal. When we talk about any fall fertility, I like to put it down in the ground. I don't like to leave it on top because you want to protect it. Well, let's talk about nitrogen. For the most part, we don't put a lot of nitrogen out in the fall, but we will put some out in some fields that are well drained, not going to be floodable in the spring, and we know we're going to get that crop in early. If you're putting nitrogen out in the fall, you've got to place it down deep. Because here's why. You've got things in that soil that are going to break down that nitrogen and start releasing that nitrogen. For example, if you're out in this field where you've got some wheat stubble, you got a lot of urease enzyme out there in no-till of any sort from your previous crop residue. When you have that urease enzyme and you have some nitrogen applied, it's going to start releasing that nitrogen and you're just going to lose it. So if you put it down safely below the soil, you can negate some of that effect. The other thing is soil bacteria that are going to convert that nitrogen into a form that may leach. Those soil bacteria don't stop at 50 degrees. A lot of guys think, well, if it's below 50 degrees in the soil, I can put it out there safely. Yes, it's more safe than if that soil temperature was warmer, because there'd be more bacterial activity. But that bacterial activity really doesn't stop until the soil freezes up, so you have to keep those things in mind.
Well, Darren spent quite a bit of time here talking about nitrogen, but one of the things that he neglected to mention was nitrogen stabilizers, Darren. It's super important.
Give me another couple minutes to talk here. We'll have it all taken care of. All right, go ahead. You tell us what you see then.
Well, anyway, the most important thing if you're going to have nitrogen in the soil is obviously we don't want to lose it. When you're putting it out there in the fall, you don't want to waste that money, okay? So you've got to try to keep it as much as possible in the ammonium form, because the ammonium form is positively charged and that will lock into your soil, which is negatively charged. Nitrate, on the other hand, is negatively charged. So if you get your nitrogen converted over to nitrate, that's a problem. You get rain and the nitrate is literally repelled out of your soil because soil is a negative charge, nitrate has a negative charge. That's a big issue. With nitrogen stabilizers, we can keep nitrogen in the ammonium form longer. We can keep it in that soil longer. And the other important thing to note here is plants need the ammonium form of nitrogen. That's what they use internally. So if they can bring in nitrate, but then they have to expend more energy to convert it over to ammonium again. So we're not saying that in every single situation you have to have a nitrogen stabilizer, but what we are saying is when nitrogen is high priced, it's certainly something you've got to take a look at on your farm, especially when you're applying nitrogen in the fall.
Well, there are a number of good products too to choose from, whether it's Nutrisphere N or Instinct from Dow. Even using some Access that has sulfur basically in it has been a good help in preventing that nitrogen from being lost. And sulfur is an important nutrient as well. Now, if you're putting sulfur out in the fall, again, you have to be concerned about the leaching possibility because sulfur is another one of those leachable nutrients.
Okay, but one that isn't leachable is phosphorus. Phosphorus basically is not going to move when you put it down in the soil, and that's why when we talk about nutrient placement in the fall, we don't like seeing phosphorus broadcast on top of the ground and not worked in, because now all your phosphorus is on top of the ground, and when you get a rain, chances are there's going to be a little bit of erosion out in your field, and the dirt is going to carry the phosphorus with it. The phosphorus is not going to move down into the soil.
Even as you work it in though, Brian, how deep are you really working that phosphorus in? When you broadcast it on top of the ground, even if you're doing tillage, say at 6 inches deep, you're really only moving a majority of that phosphorus down 2 or 3 inches in the soil.
Yeah, but that's not bad. We just want it off the soil surface. That's our whole point with this.
That definitely helps, but you look at where fertility levels are, and with phosphorus levels, they're very high in the top 6 inches in most soils. I mean,
the top 2 inches in most soils.
Your highest concentration in your soil is in the top couple inches.
So here's what we like to do to solve that whole problem is we'll go out with strip till and put a whole bunch of our phosphorus down at 10 inches deep. So now we're leading those roots down deeper in the soil. We know that our top 2 inches are built up all over the United States. They are tremendously built up, but not down at 6 inches, not down at 10 inches, not down at 14 inches. We want to get more nutrients down a little deeper in the ground, so when our soil dries out in those top couple inches, we have plenty of moisture and nutrients down a little deeper in the ground.
Well, here's the problem though, Brian, too, is when you're putting all this phosphorus out there, and believe me, farmers in the United States, and the data shows that we aren't putting as much phosphorus out as our crop is removing. So we need to be putting out a little bit more. We just have to protect that phosphorus that we're putting out there as well, because a lot of it ends up getting tied up in our soil. So whether it's using a product like Avail or using something like Pro Germinator, where that phosphorus is already protected in a liquid form, getting those products out there in a band and protecting that band is critical to get your crop extracting as much phosphorus as possible.
Okay, what you just got to there is what we hadn't talked about yet. The last thing we wanted to cover with this nutrient placement thing is if you can band your fertilizer, you're probably going to have better uptake next year. Okay, so you can go out and broadcast fertilizer, but just keep in mind that your roots are not going to be able to explore every last inch of soil out there, and a lot of the fertilizer you apply in a broadcast is not going to be used up this coming year. So if you want to get the most out of the dollars you invested this fall, you should probably band that fertilizer in the fall. That's another reason why we like strip till, we like banding with the planter. And I'm not saying we do that on every acre. We do some broadcasts just to find out kind of the comparison between the two. But I can tell you we've got a long-term study going on. We're on, I don't remember if it's year 10 now or year 11, where we've taken fields and we've put on literally 50% more P&K in a broadcast compared to banding. 50% more. And those fields where we've been putting on 50% more for 10 or 11 years now, we're not getting any additional yield. So that's just telling me that, yeah, I guess the university studies are right, where if we ban the fertilizer and we put out what the plant actually should use, that's all we need. Okay, we don't have to go put on a lot of extra pounds or anything like that. If we can ban the fertilizer, we can extract a lot of those nutrients right away this coming year.
Well, two more things. When we talk about potassium and we talk about micronutrients, they can also be done in the fall. Potassium doesn't move much in the soil. It's another one like the phosphorus that we prefer to see banded at about 6 or 8 inches deep, right below where we're going to plant. That's a nice way to do it. Otherwise, you could do it in the spring in the furrow with something like Sure-K. With micronutrients, you could do it in the furrow or in a 2x2 in your corn in the spring. Otherwise, you could put it down with your 6 or 8 inch deep band. That would be a nice way to get micronutrients out there so you know they're right with the rest of your nutrition that your roots are going to grow right through.
Well, once again, where you place nutrients in the fall is very important. And it also makes a lot of difference which nutrients you apply, if you're using nitrogen stabilizers, things to keep phosphorus more available. There's really a lot to it. So just make sure you're talking to your agronomist. If you can do a good job with fertility on your farm, you're going to have higher yields in the future.
Well, you may have higher yields if you can control weeds like our Weed of the Week. This one is a huge yield robber. Can you identify it?